Today I am walking along Greenwood Bay Drive here in Tiburon, California, and this is really going to be my last video of the year here in California, and I really am going to miss it here. It was a fantastic summer. The weather couldn't have been better, but at the same time I am looking forward to going back to Florida, and by the time you guys watch this video, I'll already be in Miami working on the next one for you. So retirement in 2025 is quickly becoming only for the rich and a luxury in life. But speaking of rich, how do you even know if you are rich anymore? Because the world of money is moving so quickly these days. How can you tell if you are rich? What does it mean to be rich? Well, a lot of people have different versions of it. You know, you can say, I don't have a lot of money, but I'm wealthy because I have my health and I have my family, so that makes me rich. That's one kind of rich. Other people measure it by their finances alone. What's my net worth compared to everybody else? But how much money do you actually need to feel rich? Is it $100,000 a year salary? Is it $250,000 a year? Or is it $1 million in the bank? Or is it something completely different, like peace of mind or freedom over your time? Those are other ways you might feel wealthy. I know that's probably the number one thing for me, the fact that I completely control my schedule these days. You know, the number one thing that makes me feel wealthy is the complete control over my time. I love being able to do things when I want to do it, wake up when I want to wake up, and work everything around my schedule and how I want to do it. Not everybody has that luxury. A lot of people have to wake up and go to work every day to a job that they hate. And I feel fortunate that I don't have to do that. But let's look at the money side of things first, because I know that's what everybody wants to hear about. And to get you into the top 10% of earners in the United States, you need to earn around $250,000 a year or more, or at least have a $2.1 million of net worth after all of your debts and adjusted for inflation. This is usually people with careers in medicine, tech, business owners, or dual income households that are both earning high salaries. And here's the key. Once you reach that level, you don't automatically live a luxurious lifestyle, but what you gain from it is options. You know, the ability to choose where you live, where your kids go to school, if you travel, or whether you can quit your job that you hate. You know, it gives you freedom in life that you don't have if you are below that. And of course, because it's the top 10%, naturally, most people will never end up in this category because it's just not realistic. But here's where the typical American does end up. Between ages 18 to 24, you might have $11,000 worth of net worth. 35 to 44, you might have $135,000. 55 to 64, maybe $410,000. And between ages 70 and 74, about $476,000. And of course, usually it starts to go down from there because after you reach your mid-70s, you're probably going to be depleting your net worth and withdrawing most of the money you save for retirement in order to live out the rest of your life. So it's like this. If you are in your 20s or your 30s right now, you are not supposed to feel wealthy. You know, this is the struggle time. This is the time when you have to build up to actually having something in life. You know, the problem is social media, all these young kids in their mid-20s who are already multimillionaires and flashing all their cash and everything that they own online. And it makes everybody else who's in their mid-20s think that if they don't have that by now, then there's some kind of a failure. But it's just not the case, guys. Like, I look at myself as an example. You know, in my mid-20s, I would never be able to do what I'm doing right now, coming to California for long stretches of the summer and then going back to Florida, paying for 2 places to live, things like that. It's expensive, but I built myself up to it. You know, it's like you can't have it all from the very beginning. Life just doesn't work that way. But if you have patience and if you consistently work towards your goal, if something like that is your goal, then you will have it. It's just a matter of time. It's not if, but when. But here's the most interesting thing. Even the top 10% of Americans, a lot of times, they don't actually feel rich because their money is often tied up in their home, their retirement accounts, their businesses. A lot of it is not liquid cash, and they live in expensive areas of the country like New York, San Francisco, LA, Miami, places where the cost of living is high, and that eats into the amount of money you're able to put away. So a lot of people in this category don't feel rich, but they feel like they're at least in the upper class of society, and they still budget and they watch their spending. They contribute heavily to their retirement savings, and they might go on 1 or 2 vacations a year. They will buy coffee without thinking about it and shop on Amazon, but still won't worry about the money. Because obviously if you're making multiple 6 figures a year, if you spend an extra $500 a month on non-essentials, it really doesn't matter. But the psychology behind these people not feeling wealthy is kind of interesting, because I've talked about this a little bit in past videos, but you use the term $1 million, for example. When I was a kid growing up, $1 million was a lot of money. McDonald's used to give away $1 million for winning the Monopoly Boardwalk game. And it used to be like, you're set for life if you win this. But nowadays, $1 million is most likely not going to have you set for life unless you're already older and you live in a low cost of living area, then maybe. But the point is that the goalpost for what wealth is keeps moving. If you make 100 grand a year, now you want to make 200 grand a year. If you reach 200 grand a year, now you want to make $500,000 a year. Like, it's never enough, which is definitely a problem, and that's what we call greed. And even if you make it to a very comfortable upper middle class lifestyle, you see a 25-year-old driving a Lamborghini on TikTok because he made it big in crypto, that makes you feel like a failure because it took you until 45 to reach that. That's not reality. Sure, there are some people out there who got lucky like that and have made a fortune at a very young age, but those people are an extremely small minority. So one of the biggest things you can do is just not compare yourself to where other people have made it, especially if they're a lot older or a lot younger than you. Maybe you can compare yourself to your peers, people in a similar age group, to kind of gauge how far you have made it. But comparing yourself to somebody much younger that made it early, or somebody much older that has had decades to build up wealth, is not a fair comparison. And here's the thing, there's a huge difference between the top 10% and the top 1% in America. The top 1% usually means you have a $10 million plus net worth. You might make over $600,000 a year. And at this level, running out of money is not really a concern anymore. People in this category can make big mistakes. They can lose their job, they can take big financial risks, and they can still be fine, providing that they don't lose control. They don't check their bank accounts or their budget to see if they can go on vacation. They just do it. But there's actually a middle ground between the top 1% and the top 10%. People who have a $3 to $5 million net worth, and people who have enough investments to withdraw anywhere between $100,000 and $300,000 per year without working. Those people aren't flying on private jets, but they can retire early, they can live in a nice neighborhood, they can also travel whenever they want, and they're never going to stress about spending $150 at a restaurant for dinner. This is kind of the threshold that you need to reach in today's day and age to sort of start feeling wealthy. $3 to $5 million net worth is pretty hefty, and you're well beyond most folks at that point, and you can just kind of stop worrying about the money. So how do you reach this top tier of society if it's a goal of yours? Well, people reach it through different methods. Some people reach it through extreme frugality over many years. Some people just work constantly. They are workaholics. People work 60 or 80 hours a week to make as much money as possible and put it away and compound it. And other people just hustle for decades. People might work their entire life and never retire and never really stop working in order to achieve this status. And you have to sit there and ask yourself, when is enough for me? I've heard from many of you about financial situations and things that you go through in life. And I feel like there's a very big spectrum of people out there. Like, some people can be happy making 50 grand a year and living in an average neighborhood and having all their bills paid. Other people, they'll feel like a complete failure if they're doing that, and they need to make multiple 6 figures a year and live in a $1 million plus home and drive a luxury car in order to feel like they are somebody. For me, the thing that makes me feel wealthy is the fact that I can come here for 5 months out of the year and not worry about it, guys. Now, that's been many years of building up to that. And also, I don't have any kids. I have very low expenses. That enables me to have that sort of freedom. I don't have to get back to Florida so my kid can go back to school. I don't have any debt that I have to contribute to pay off each month that will hinder my ability to do this. I don't have any expensive car payments. I don't buy a bunch of things each month, just basic necessities for survival, food and utilities, and that's it. I would have to say, like, when I started doing this about 4 years ago on a regular basis, that's what makes me feel wealthy. I was never able to stay as long as I'm able to stay now, but just the fact that I was even able to do it at all, come here for a month or two back in 2021 felt extremely luxurious, and it still does now. But the sad part is people lose sight of what it means to be rich. Like, people build up this net worth, they make it to the top 10% or even the top 5% of Americans, and they lose sight of what it actually means to be rich. By the time a lot of people get there, they don't even enjoy it. A lot of people have the numbers to be rich on paper, but they don't have the mindset to be rich. And I guess in some ways it's good, because if you get to a point where you are wealthy and all of a sudden you have a realization that you are, and you start spending too much, then that wealth can disappear pretty quickly, especially with how expensive everything is now. So in some ways it's good to still kind of act like you're poor, even if you are rich, because after all, it's those spending and saving habits that got you there to begin with. But here are some of the characteristics that people say definitely make them feel rich. And I'd have to agree with all of these. Being able to say no to a boss, a client, or a toxic job. In my case, it was not having to work as a real estate agent anymore. My last 2 or 3 years of being an agent, I kind of hated it, guys, and I really wanted to get out. And when I started my YouTube channel, my number one goal was to turn this into my full-time living, and I did just that. It took me a couple years to do it, and I was able to move on and do something in life that I really enjoy versus something that I just couldn't stand anymore. Also, knowing that your family is safe. If something unexpected happens, they'll be taken care of. Having time freedom where your day belongs to you. You decide how you want to spend most of the hours of the day. Or not caring about what your neighbor drives or where they go on vacation, because you know that you could do it too, but you're just choosing not to. The reality is, most people will never become a millionaire. Most people will never make it into the top 10% of society. That's why it's the top 10%. But that's okay, because you don't have to get to these levels in life in order to feel rich. I wanted to bring this up and talk about it because I wanted to make sure people understand that there are other things that can make you feel rich. And maybe if you reach all those milestones in life, it doesn't really matter what your net worth is. If you're able to do things that you enjoy and it's not a financial concern for you, well, in my opinion, that's wealthy, regardless of what the number on your bank account or your financial statement says. When your bills are paid and you can sleep without worrying about money, and you have control over your time, and you don't live your life trying to impress anyone anymore, that's real wealth. And I want to talk about the retirement crisis that's going on in America, because retirement is quickly becoming a thing of the past. I believe that within the next 20 or 30 years, retirement will be sort of a word that is lost to history. It'll be something that people just used to talk about and used to do, but not something that people can realistically achieve anymore, at least if things continue in this direction with the cost of living, especially with the wages not keeping up with the cost of living. How is anybody supposed to be able to save up enough retirement money to actually retire if they can barely afford to live and pay their bills? Right now in America, about half of Americans are not saving enough for retirement. 45% of Americans say that they feel financially unprepared for retirement. And basically everybody kind of needs to save more. You can run the risk of saving too much if you're a high income earner or extremely responsible with your finances, but that's a very select group of people that have that problem. Honestly, if you've saved too much for retirement, it's kind of a luxury in 2025. Already in 2025, the idea of retiring at 65 or 70 years old is completely unattainable for 2/3 of Americans, guys. Think about that. 2/3 of people cannot retire at retirement age. Many people in this category expect to continue working as long as their bodies able them to, and life expectancy is rising, but savings and pensions and 401ks are not. So realistically, where does this go? Well, it goes where these people are saying. People are being very realistic about it. People realize that they're probably not going to be able to retire if things remain the way they are. And so my theory is, if it's already like that now, imagine how it's going to be in 20 or 30 years from now, because clearly the Fed and our government has no real interest in fixing the economy and making it work for the everyday person. They're only interested in keeping it going and working for the most wealthy who have their hands in all the assets. And the retirement savings shortfall spans across all different generations, income levels, and when we look at younger folks like millennials and Gen Z, they say they just want to know they'll have something later in life. Well, I don't know what that something even would be, because it's probably not going to be Social Security. And if you can't save enough to actually retire, then what will it be? I don't know. Pensions are totally ancient history. I'm sure a lot of younger people, if you're under the age of 30, probably don't even know what a pension is, because that's something that doesn't really exist anymore. There might be a few companies out there that still offer one, but they are extremely few and far between. Social Security, that was never intended to be your full retirement income. But fast forward to today, it is for so many people. In fact, a lot of people who watch this channel have written me over the years to tell me how they're able to survive on Social Security alone. And it's kind of amazing, guys, because considering the typical Social Security check is only about $2,000 a month, the fact that people can survive on that even today in 2025 is very impressive. But it also means you have to live extremely frugal, and there's really no room for error with your finances if you're doing this. Really, the only way retirement is going to be common in the future is if we go back to having some sort of guaranteed plan that you can retire on, like old school pensions, for example. That would need to be brought back, but you know that's not going to happen. I mean, companies these days, fire people by the tens of thousands just to increase their share prices a few bucks. So these companies are not going to be parting with their cold hard cash to make sure that you have a comfy and cozy retirement. But if you have a job right now, you're one of the lucky ones, first of all. And if your job offers a 401k matching program, you're even luckier. And all the experts agree that you should be maxing that out. If they give you $1 for every dollar that you contribute, up to $10,000 a year, well, that means you should be finding some way possible where you can contribute that full $10,000 a year, and then your employer will also contribute 10 grand a year, and that's a free $10,000 you're getting for retirement, plus the compounding interest over however many years that you didn't have to earn and save for yourself. So taking advantage of those employer contributions can really make a difference of whether or not you'll be able to retire in the future. Even if you can only afford to save $100 a month for retirement, guys, that is better than nothing, especially if you have an employer matched program. Because if you have something like that, that means you're saving $200 a month for retirement after their contribution. And every little bit adds up over the years to helping you have more. I mean, you guys have probably heard several stories in the past about, the janitor that makes minimum wage and retires a millionaire 30 or 40 years down the road because it's been small, consistent investments over the years, always contributing to retirement over the span of decades that leads them to being a millionaire, even though they weren't contributing much to begin with. That is more than possible and achievable. The problem is just a lot of people don't do it. They want to have things now. They spend money on whatever they want right now and don't worry about the future. We've all been there. I'm guilty of it too. Now, kind of circling back to retirement, something I want to talk about is Social Security and the cost of living increases. Because here's the funny thing about that. The government uses the CPI data to determine how much of a cost of living increase you should get if you receive a Social Security check. But here's the thing. The CPI numbers are so doctored and so manipulated that they're not realistic on how most people live, spend money, and handle their finances, and the way they calculate it really has nothing to do with the average person's monthly budget. Because Social Security calculations still work off of the traditional CPIW index, which is a 1970s era inflation formula that is out of date. Here's the funny thing about that. They say that this index actually overstates inflation, leading to larger benefit increases than necessary, and this is going to cost taxpayers an estimated $204 billion over the next decade. So they're already telling you that you're getting too much money. These cost of living increases that you're getting year over year from Social Security are too high. You can't have that. This is based on an outdated formula, so we need to make sure it gets lowered, not raised. So economists say that the CPIW is less accurate at reflecting the real cost of living changes that people experience. They're actually telling us that your cost of living is going up even lower than what the CPIW is telling us that it is. Raise your hand if you believe that one. So they want to switch over to CPIU, which the BLS uses, but not for Social Security calculations. And if they do this, then this is going to shrink the amount of cost of living updates that people get who are collecting Social Security. But obviously there's a lot of hypocrisy going on with this, because they always use these calculations and numbers in their favor and use it in a way to kind of screw you over. Here's what I mean. In 2017, Congress adopted the changed CPI in the tax code in order to generate more tax revenue over time. But because the changed CPI rises slower than the traditional CPI, tax brackets grow more slowly, causing more people to be taxed at higher rates. Because inflation is higher than what's being reported on this changed CPI, and so the tax brackets don't grow as much, but your income does, so that makes it so they can tax people more money. And this change was estimated to raise $134 billion in extra taxes over the next 10 years. But when it comes to using changed CPI to slow Social Security benefit growth, lawmakers don't support it. In other words, they adopt it when it brings in more money, but they reject it when it reduces spending. So if they were to make this change, where Social Security benefits were tied to the changed CPI, it would shrink the financial shortfall of Social Security by about 20%. And there would be no need to raise taxes or cut current benefits, just slow the rate of yearly increases. Now, I'm sure a lot of people who collect a Social Security check would be completely outraged if this were to happen. And rightfully so, in the sense that you're already not getting enough that you really need right now to keep up with the true cost of living. A lot of people say that Social Security is never going to go away. They've been talking about that for decades, and it's never happened so far. And you're always going to get your Social Security check, and they will print as much money as possible to make sure that happens, but your Social Security check might be worthless. Like in the future, you might get $10,000 a month in your monthly Social Security check, but it will buy you half of what it buys you today. That's kind of where this is going. Either way, it is contributing to what I said in the beginning, where retirement is probably going to be an extinct concept within the next few decades, and most people that are born in the next 20 or 30 years probably won't even know what it is. So hope everybody who got to retire at some point in their life and enjoy not working really has enjoyed it, because you lived a special moment through human history. And I just want to thank everybody here in California for being so nice to my wife and I while we were here. It was an amazing time, and I look forward to coming back next year. And if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.